I will introduce the panel and kind of put it into context why we ended up with 3 people while we were planning to be around 8 people or so, and kind of where the idea for the panel comes from, because in the description of the panel there is a link between recent debates with democratic economic planning, which I don't think we'll be getting into a lot today, but let me do it. Welcome to the panel. My name is Bengi. I think I'm the only one who's based at the kind of other side of the world. I'm based in Montreal, so it's 8 p.m. yesterday for me compared to you guys. I'm associate professor at the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment at Concordia University. I'm originally an economist by training, but my work is more on political economy of development, and particularly developmentalism and environment. But lately I've been working on democratic economic planning, commons and degrowth, so more from the side of economic alternatives. I did my PhD at UMass Amherst. That was kind of my original connection with the entire diverse economies, community economies, framework, collective, people. So here I am. So before I introduce Kelly, who will be giving, who will be speaking on the CROI, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Before I give the floor to Kelly and introduce her, the idea for the panel started off of an email thread on the Community Economies Research Network email list in mid-July, with a fellow community economies researcher asking, inquiring about examples of cost-benefit analysis or accounting for return on quote-unquote investment, however kind of widely or narrowly we define it, that might be useful for us as community economies researchers or community economies activists, that in ways go beyond kind of the more traditional kind of exclusively monetarily based cost-benefit analyses, alternatives that might be underwritten by a diverse economist thinking. That kind of sparked off a debate on the email list with most people, I would say everyone, critical or let's say cautious of kind of traditional cost-benefit analyses, but diverging opinions on how useful or how kind of salvageable the kind of methodology that it embodies can be, with some people thinking or saying or arguing that it's not salvageable at all, it can never be kind of made useful, to kind of, can we make this cautiously kind of useful, kind of a range of ideas. Within that context, Kelly's work on CROI was brought up, and then again, within that context, the original convener of the panel, Ellen, who's also based in Canada, so-called Canada, had brought up kind of a counterpart of a debate, or kind of a parallel debate that was happening, or that is happening in kind of the circles discussing democratic economic planning within a post-capitalist economy, a circle that I'm also a part of. Ellen and I are part of a research group on democratic economic planning based out of Université de Saint Paul, where kind of a lot of the debate is now kind of going towards moving beyond single measures or single indicators of economic activity, even in kind of these post-capitalist, democratically planned kind of economic initiatives or economic imaginaries. If you follow the work of Aaron Benanov, he's been writing on kind of he's been writing on the notion of a multi-criterial economy lately in the New Left Review. So kind of that contributes to that debate. So, and in that kind of thread and discussion, the idea came up that we would organize a Liviana session. There were many people who were interested and who had like many interesting ideas. So we originally planned kind of a roundtable / conversational format. But the final kind of scheduling of the event implied that it would be 2 a.m. Central European time, which meant that we lost kind of half of our potential participants. Ellen had personal reasons that she couldn't be here, so that left me, Kelly, and Anissa, and you guys. So I think we're gonna still have a good conversation. So I'm gonna pass it on to Kelly. Not that she needs introduction to this crowd, I think, but I will still do the kind of fulfill the tradition and read a brief bio. Kelly Domrowski is a professor of geography at Massey University and the president of the New Zealand Geographical Society. Her research focuses on community and diverse economies, feminist geography, and post-capitalist transitions, with projects spanning Aotearoa, I'm not sure if I said that correctly, New Zealand, China, and the Asia-Pacific region. She's a Rutherford Discovery Fellow and co-editor of the Handbook of Diverse Economies, advancing concepts of caring economies and urban commons. She's worked with community organizations to track their own surplus investments of time, energy, and money into different initiatives, experimenting with 4 different iterations of a community economy return on investment tool. So, Kelly, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, thank you for that context of how we came up with this possible session together. And what I found as I was today hunting through my previous talks was that we actually had a session on this in the 2022 Liviana. So I would encourage you to go check that out, because I just listened to the whole thing again today, because I was like, I have zero recollection of this. And if it wasn't on YouTube and I could see myself standing there, I wouldn't believe that I'd actually already done this. So that may say something either about that time where I had small children, or this time where I'm going through menopause, or it may just be that I repeat myself a lot and don't recall it. But it was really interesting to go back to that, and at that point we had done 3 different takes on developing a zero, or we were halfway through the 3rd, and we had a lot of questions. So we organized this session on how to develop this community economies return on investment measurement. So Kath Gibson actually spoke first. I got a screenshot about where this idea of a community economy return on investment came from. And she talked about how in chapter 6 of Take Back the Economy, they were trying to think up a way to reclaim finance, to take back finance, because prior to Take Back the Economy, diverse economies mainly intervened in labour, enterprise and transactions as those parts. But with Take Back the Economy, Kath and Jenny and Stephen introduced finance and property as 2 further things that needed to be taken back. And in the finance one, they were thinking about, like, what is the point of finance? Why is finance part of the economy? And what they, what Kath said in her talk there, which you can go back and look at, it was really about thinking about saving for the future and investing in the future and investing in a different kind of future in the context of community economies. So the community economy return on investment idea emerged from this idea to try and think about some kind of, it wasn't a measurement. It was like a kind of an anecdote or an analogy of how do we think about investing in the future, and what's our return on investment, not to those of people putting the money in, but what's the return on investment to the planet and to the commons, and to the different ethical coordinates of a community economy. So the main point there is that the return is not to this person with lots of money. The return is to the planet. And that's where this idea of community economy return on investment came from. And Kath has worked with Maliha Safri and 2 colleagues in Paris to develop a quantitative return on investment, and you might have seen that paper before. But at the same time as that was happening, we didn't know they were writing that paper, Stephen Healy, Graydon Diprose, and myself we're working with colleagues in Ōtautahi Christchurch in the South Island of New Zealand to co-develop something called a community economy return on investment tool, where we just took the general name and idea and then we just started again with the community about what that might look like. So we didn't really use the Take Back the Economy version except for as an inspiring name and start point. So we were really interested in this urban farm in Christchurch where, this was a demolished house in the centre of the city, and the organisation built up from food scraps that they collected around the city, built up 30 centimetres of their own soil, grew food, and then sold it back to restaurants in the city, and in a part of the city that didn't have green waste collection. So they collected it by e-bike and did that. And they did that while offering internships and mental health care to young people. So at the time, there was an 8-week wait list for urgent mental health care in Christchurch. And it was really like a kind of intervention that was really about trying to help young people access some kind of connection to the world. Yeah, the soil, the trees, the plants, each other, and also social workers. So it was started by a social worker and a permacultural farmer. And immediately going in there, we could see that there was value in what they were doing. The young people were talking about the changes that they felt, and the social workers were talking about the changes that they'd seen. Meanwhile, the restaurants were talking about the nice food they were getting, and then the council was talking about how great it was that there was this green waste collection. And then, of course, the worms were not talking, but if they had been talking, they would have been talking about the great food that they were digesting on site there. So it was a really, obviously cool intervention. Why do you need to measure that? Why do you need to come up with some way of doing a return on investment for it? Because clearly just a 20-minute visit around the site, you can probably feel pretty clearly that something good is going on here. But what they told us was that they wanted to be able to better track their own changes and their own investments of time and energy into what they were doing. They wanted to upscale their composting to a much larger volume, and they were interested in processing higher amounts of food waste. They also wanted to track the well-being benefits to the young people and also the environment. And they had a lot of things that they wanted to do, and they also wanted to communicate that back to their funders, which in the beginning was Vodafone, was one of the key funders, and also other funders that were coming in as the organisation got going over time. So we developed a way of thinking about, we actually just work, you can see in the background there, achieved plus, achieved and attempted. We helped them think about what they were doing in terms of creating assessment criteria in the same way that you might assess an essay. So first we did ethnographic, I did ethnographic work with the community for 6 months, and then we did some workshops with them where we mapped what we saw as their values as we saw them being practiced. So we didn't ask them in interviews, what are your values? But we noted down what they put their time and energy into, what they spent a lot of time working on, what they seemed to care about in the conversations that was coming up ethnographically. And then we reflected that back to them in a workshop, and then they reorganized it and corrected it. You can see we use post-it notes there. And they sort of mapped their practices onto particular values first. And then this is the second stage. We started to think about articulating what do those values look like when they're realized fully, which is achieved, more than you could imagine, which is achieved plus, and then if they were kind of attempted or not achieved. So we kind of broke it down like you would when you're creating a rubric in an educational setting, articulating what it is that you want your students to achieve. And I'd done this with students before, so I kind of was applying this idea. And then you can see they challenged our language. They said, we don't want to talk about achieved, because these are people who are not in school because they hate school. So how can we change that language? So they used the language of the plants, and they talked about the young people coming in with their hoods on and then kind of like unfurling as they, out to the sunshine, as they grew in their physical strength and their interaction with the environment. So we use that language of wilting, growing, thriving, mature. And you can see it's very dense. We used words to describe what it was we were hearing that they wanted. This is just one of the criteria. This is about cultivate and its relationship with the wider community, but we also had individual and self-care, and then we also had cultivate as an organization within itself. And we put together those big descriptions, so it's sort of a qualitative rubric. And then we kind of pulled out elements of that, and we had another workshop where we worked with the community with the community organization to kind of rate themselves. Where did they think they were at in each of these different elements? And we talked to the staff about which elements they were most worried about, because we didn't feel we could do everything in a workshop. And as you can see, we did it on paper with sticks and rocks, so it was a bit of a kind of outdoor exercise because there's no indoor spaces in that space. And we talked through, it's still got some big language there, and we talked through with the young people and the staff about what do those things mean. And then, we kind of went back with our report and thought, oh, some of that language isn't really it's the right language to describe, but it's not the right language to communicate with them, what this is. Like kids going, what does non-punitive mean, So that was our first take. And then we kind of finished up, and I had a baby, and we didn't really finish off the report back, but we drafted a community guide of how to do this process with a community or for a community organization to do it themselves. And we didn't put this in, but we had the idea of having some kind of spider graph thing for visually representing those assessment criteria in a way that was a bit quicker than reading those things. The reason I've got this photo here is this is Te Hiko, and I don't know how it went, but yesterday a young man I know used the community guide. He's been working on it for a few weeks to do a community assessment of Te Hiko's Community Wealth Pool, which is a organisation in Porirua in New Zealand, and he used it, and I'm yet to know, catch up with him and find out how that went. So it's still kind of circulating this idea. Then we kind of went through a take 2 and 3, which was because I was working on a project with an Indigenous colleague, and she developed this Māori order compass, which Māori order means vitality or life force in Te Reo Māori. And she wanted to design urban spaces that enhanced Māori order. And it's life force or vitality for both human and non-human. And we were working with an organisation called Life in Vacant Spaces, and we kind of, which is an organisation that that matched up private landowners with empty land because their buildings had been destroyed in the earthquake or pulled down, with community organisations or educational or small business entrepreneurs who wanted to use that land to do something. And Life in Vacant Spaces enabled more than 70 projects in the 10 years that we looked at what they did. One of them is this bicycle workshop called RAD Bikes. RAD stands for Recycle a Danga. A danga, I don't know if Australians have that word, but in New Zealand that means like a crappy old bike. That's just one example of an organisation. So we were funded by National Science Challenge, Building Better Homes, Towns and Cities, and this is Amanda's very complex Māori order compass. And what I tried to do in this project was to work with Amanda, to work with Life in Vacant Spaces, and to work with the Seroi idea to kind of translate this into something that might be able to communicate the value of life in vacant spaces to the audience of the City Council and also the city more widely, because they're the ones that really in the end vote in and approve and disapprove if the council spends money on supporting an organisation like Life in Vacant Spaces, which they were supporting at that time. So we kind of this, because Amanda's a designer, this was more of a visual project on how do we represent what's happening. And so we drew on the community economy return on investment as an idea to think about what was being, what the area of investment was. And then we drew on the Māori order tool to think about what the return on that investment was in terms of Māori order for the city. So we had a book and an exhibition, And then we after that, developed a more in-depth report where we tried to really nut out what the well-being and Modi order returns were on each of these sort of investment areas. It kind of did my head in a bit. We were kind of like trying to force something that might maybe didn't work. But what we did do is sort of take this quite complex compass and then put it into this more simple version here, where we broke it down into its 6 areas, and then we kind of highlighted them if the project was contributing to that in some way, but we didn't quantify it. And then when we did the exhibition, we tried to highlight when something was being contributed to. We kind of put in the evidence for how it was enhancing, for example, hapori order, which means community well-being, what the evidence was for that. And the form of evidence could be interviews, it could be stats, it could be literature. Different forms of evidence was used to make that claim. And this is the quite complex summary table that my intern produced, where we sort of have, these are the ethical coordinates of a community economy return on investment. And then these are kind of the returns in terms of Modi order. And he's sort of color coded the different things to show what the different projects were doing. And you can see most of them were sort of community well-being because of what Life in Vacant Spaces does. But some of them filled more boxes than others, like the same example I just used of Cultivate was one of the studies here too, filled a lot of different boxes because it was so holistic. So that one, yeah, I wasn't entirely happy with that. We have these reports that we sent out to the council and different stakeholders to kind of talk about the well-being impacts of life in vacant spaces as a concept and an idea. During that time, we thought maybe we need to go back to the quantitative idea. So we picked one of those case studies, the Green Lab, which was re-greening post-earthquake areas that had been kind of become gravel. And they wanted to do a more quantitative one. And so I had an intern from I was one of Zara Barron's students actually who came over, and she did undergraduate degree in economics. And so she tried to develop a CROI based on more what Kathy and Maliha had done. And did the kind of economic one. I'm not going to present that to you because it's a lot of stuff in there, but this is a shot from the 2022 one where you can see her presenting it as she was trying to work out what to do. But the main point is this comes from her report. She says here, as we can see after the second round of analysis, the results change quite drastically. And what she did with the encouragement of Kath Gibson was to try a bunch of different ways of measuring things and putting, the big discussion was, should you put unpaid labour as an investment or should you put it as a return? So there was a big discussion about that. And in the end, she just presented all the different models so that you could kind of see how if you put it as an investment, it would look like this. And if you put it as a return, it looked like this. And I thought I had a quote there from Kath, but Kath says something in the 2022 one like, well, capitalism never valued unpaid labour, so why should we put it on the investment side when they're not going to recognise it anyway? Let's put it as a return because it's a return to the commons and people working together. It's a community economy return. So that was her argument. So Moy, which is Leni Murray's nickname, she went through a bunch of different attempts at that. Our most recent one, which we've just been working on this year, is a circular economy return on investment. So we've kind of swapped out the C for community to circular because we're doing work on circular economies and waste. And this feels much more possible because waste is something much more measurable. You can weigh it, you can quantify it, you can do carbon emission stuff on it. There's a lot of environmental indicators we can use. And so now we're using it to think about what for innovators trying to put in place sort of circular economy initiatives in their own enterprises in local council or in community organizations, like what's the return to circularity? So how do we measure the return? So you're investing stuff and what's the return in terms of waste reduction and or increased circularity? So that's where we're going now. We just ran a circular economy symposium and Dr. Jay Whitehead was our keynote speaker, and he is a Māori economist who does social return on investment. And he's helping us think through the feasibility of circular economy return on investment. This was supposed to be animated, so you could see the quote behind it. But he quotes Bruce Lee to say, dollars for him are like the finger pointing at the moon. And then behind that here, sorry, you can't see it, it says something like the common mistake is to look at the finger pointing at the moon and then to suck it. Um, and so he talks about, like, as an economist, and maybe Bengi can attest to this. He knows you're making it all up and you're trying to come up with ways to put values on things, and that the quantitative doesn't capture everything. He knows that, but he sees value in trying to do that for specific purposes. And here he has the example of Mount Fife, which he's calculated provides 32 million in environmental service benefits per annum. And then Mount Fife is beautiful. Like, those two things are both true. And one doesn't have to fully explain the other. So there were some questions at the last Ljubljana conference about, whoa, you can't capture everything with quantitative stuff. What about well-being? And it's like, yeah, you can't capture everything with quantitative stuff, and good economists know that. And you're putting limits around what it is that you're trying to do with that. So that's where we're going with the circular economy return on investment. We're meeting with Jay, not next Monday, but the Monday after, to start doing a feasibility study on what that would look like. We've decided that the audience is internal decision makers rather than it being communicating to external ones. So it's about deciding whether it's worth investing in a circular initiative from the point of view of the environment and circularity for internal decision makers. The return then is to the planet and to people in terms of greater circularity, not to the investors' pockets. So we're just being clear on that. We might use money as an indicator, or we might use environmental indicators. Jay's familiar with both. He's done work in both. Part of what we're trying to work out in this feasibility study is which one is more useful for the people who are making decisions. I'm leaning towards environmental indicators. He's leaning towards money because it's simpler, and you're communicating with a lot of people who don't have environmental training. And finally, there's where I put the thing that Kat said. The question of labour is still a live question. He's quite supportive of where labour goes in terms of people's labour, particularly if that labour is an indicator of creating a commons. Would we have to change that for a circular economy return on investment? That's a live question for us. So just to sum up, sorry, I've taken a little bit longer than I thought I would. What I've learned about measuring over all of this is that all of these qualitative and quantitative indicators, just research generally, is pointing at the moon. It isn't the real moon, right? It's just pointing towards the thing. We're trying to represent a thing. We're not actually the thing. And so I've learned to hold it lightly, but to use it when it matters. It's really important in each of these takes. We got better at identifying who the user was and who the audience was for the tool, because they have really different needs at what you're measuring. Is it for the community themselves to see the value? Is it for funders? Is it for just to help aid decision making? And that question that comes up every time is what are we doing this for? What's the point of it? And for the circular economy return on investment, one of the things we're trying to do is, we know that probably not this government, but at some point the government will probably put in place some kind of requirement for businesses to achieve a certain level of circularity. And what we want to do is develop something that can be used to do that. Because this is what we're sort of imagining, is at some point someone will have to create a standard or a law saying this level of circularity is acceptable and anything that's below that is not acceptable. So we want to intervene as people who know that this is just pointing at the moon. We want to intervene and create something that that might be usable for decision makers, that encompasses a wide range of things, so that if any point this kind of thing comes into place, we've kind of got a ready-made tool. Say, look, here we go. We've got something you can use when you put your local government resource policy in place. You could use this as your measure for circularity, rather than just basing it fully on carbon emissions, for example, which is what they might do. But we also know that all of this has to be place-based and contextualized. Every group we've worked with, we've ended up with different things. So it has to be something that's customizable, or that even if it is a standard, that it's sort of able to recognize those differences. And yeah, finally, it continues to be of interest. People keep asking me to do it. I keep coming back to it, even though I swear I won't. But here I am again. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm actually glad that you took longer than you said you would. I mean, I think it's been a really rich discussion. Um, I mean, also I neglected to mention this in the beginning, but we're slotted for 2 hours. I'm not sure if we're gonna actually use the full 2 hours if the discussion goes on, of course. But I mean, we can also end
Yeah.
whenever we want. So maybe I can say a few words to kind of follow up, and then I know Anissa has things to either kind of ask, grill Kelly on, as Kelly said in an earlier kind of correspondence, and then we can open it up for broader discussion. So I think it actually, where Kelly left off is actually really good for me to kind of jump on. Kind of this, I think it is really, it's naive or it's misleading or misguiding to actually see as if economists think that everything can be, like even mainstream economists do not think that everything can be monetized, or like they're very aware of the limits of this method. So I think kind of hitting that bag is kind of futile at this point. And really, I think the question that we should be discussing, even when we're in recognition of the limits of this method, it's still a method that funders or like grant bodies or local governments are using. I mean, despite its limitations. So we as researchers or activists or critics of this method, how do we engage with it is an important question, which I will try to speak to a little bit. But before that, maybe one thing that I wanted to highlight, I was trained in ecological economics. It's something that I teach, and I really kind of, a lot of the environmental stuff that Kelly was talking about resonated a lot. But ecological economics is a school who's kind of emerged as an alternative, as an opposition to the mainstream environmental economics. And one of its kind of foundational basis of separation was and is critique of monetary valuation, particularly cost-benefit analysis. So a few things I think that kind of distinguishes ecological economics' critique of cost-benefit analysis I wanted to kind of highlight. The first being that it's not only that kind of forcing the costs and benefits of any kind of initiative or a project. And kind of admittedly for ecological economists, it's kind of projects that have environmental implications or costs and benefits of environmental projects. That kind of it's not only that these methods evade, or certain costs and benefits evade or escape from these methods, but that what awaits it is non-trivial or it's not random. So what kind of cannot be made compatible or is kind of usually challenging to make compatible or expressed in monetary terms is kind of the very important things that should not be kind of lost. But the second thing is that it's that these methods are performative in a sense. So it's not only that we are these are not neutral kind of institutional settings that we express certain things, but they also kind of they risk reinforcing a certain framing of nature, as if kind of loss of species or environmental damage is something that can be expressed in monetary terms. So kind of that kind of implication that money and nature are compatible is kind of detrimental in kind of a wider or longer term. So I think like these are the two kind of, I guess, like critiques that we don't really see in many debates of the cost benefit analysis, but also the fact that a lot of us as ecological economists also engage in these methods still. Like there is a practical use to them, sometimes to communicate the value of certain projects like Kelly was talking about, but sometimes to communicate the damage that certain projects are going to do. So I'm originally from Istanbul, and I was asked when I was still based in Turkey by local environmental resistances to do a monetary valuation of coal-fired plants because there was at the time and still no language to kind of legally argue that these projects are very damaging, kind of in economic terms as well. So sometimes the resistances, the social movements want to use this language strategically in their fights, in their struggles. So we do find ourselves in situations where it's useful, if not pragmatically, it's politically useful. So there's two things I want to kind of highlight here. So ecological economists have been having this debate over like when or how to value kind of in monetary terms and under what conditions. So there's some of the things that was discussed there is that, for instance, is this exercise that we're going to engage in helping any kind of distributive justice? So kind of is it increasing kind of injustices, or is it going to help decrease them? The second one is that will that kind of use of monetary valuation or language actually suppress the expression or the languages, multiple languages around multiple values or costs that are associated? So are we serving to kind of further hegemonize this kind of monetary language, or like is it going to help in any way kind of to maintain that kind of plurality of valuation languages? So kind of making it political in a way, or like political and accountable in a wider sense, how to use these tools. The second thing I wanted to maybe add to the conversation is that a lot of the kind of ecological economics critique on this kind of on cost-benefit analysis and monetary valuation of environments in general comes from or is based at the comes from the thinking of this economist Otto Neurath, and kind of from the socials calculation debate of early 20th century, where the debate was kind of whether or not making choice, kind of a social choice on where to go with our economic systems, or where to invest in, or like whether or not to undertake a project or not, if that choice requires prices or like a unitary indicator. And Otto Neurath was writing and arguing that it doesn't require it, so we don't need to kind of compare options based on how much they cost, or like how much, for instance, return on investment they're going to bring in a single indicator, but we can use multiple criteria to actually kind of multiple indicators and multiple criteria to actually capture different aspects of that choice, of that project, of that investment. And that, for instance, we can talk about the monetary cost of building that thing or like that project, or the monetary return of it, but like in terms of, for instance, labor time or employment or environmental impacts or social impacts, rather than expressing them in monetary terms or in kind of in terms of a single indicator, he was advocating that we should have labor time indicators and then like a bunch of environmental indicators or social indicators that will capture different aspects of it. And then, of course, choice becomes not a technical issue of like, does it cost more than it benefits, but it becomes a social and political process. So then kind of he was saying choices should be made politically and socially through deliberative processes, through democratic negotiation of kind of looking at these different aspects and trying to decide, which also for him was kind of a part of a socialist economy, that subjects, economic subjects, become subjects in that kind of democratic, political, social process. That kind of carried on to ecological economics in the name of multi-criteria analysis as an alternative to cost-benefit analysis. But what struck me in what Kelly was kind of presenting on was that these projects, these initiatives are already doing exactly that. It is both kind of looking at not only the consequences, like costs and benefits in terms of consequences, but processes what is attempted, or kind of in their language, whatever kind of language they use to do it, it's not only the outcomes, but the process that they communicate, but also in terms of multiple criteria. It's, even if it's like a return on investment, it's obviously not kind of forced into the language of one indicator. So that's kind of the point of contact with ecological economics, and I think community economies, or a diverse economies framework on return on investment. So I'm gonna pass it on to Anissa if you're still up for for comments, and then we can open it up to discussion.
Well, thanks a lot, Bengi, and nice to meet you. I'm also in the same time zone as you, just across the border in Vermont,
All
in
right, okay,
Burlington.
we're not that far
We're
away.
not that far. And actually, I was just listening to, so I'm connected with Leadership for the Ecozoic, which is, you're nodding, no? For the others, it's an ecological economics partnership between University of Vermont and McGill University in Montreal. And there was just a lecture before I came here. I was listening to the lecture by Professor Anna Tsing on co-occupation of species, where she does this amazing analysis of invasive fish species that come along with human settler colonial incursion into an environment in Papua New Guinea. And part of what she was talking about was the way that different kinds of fish species are valued for food security. And so there was this kind of element of metrics and measuring that connects to what we're talking about tonight. And it made me think of Kevin St. Martin's research on countermetrics and countermapping. I don't really have like comments. I didn't really prepare anything because I thought that there was going to be this full panel, and my interest was kind of, I've been hounding Kelly actually for a while, saying, I want to learn how to do the zero. I want to learn how to do the zero. Because in the context that I'm working, which is food governance, right now in the region of the northeastern US, but also in international food policy spaces. And I think, Isaac, this is relevant for you as well in the context that you're working in agricultural development. And Clytie, I know that you're doing a lot of work with community composting, which is very much linked to what Kelly was talking about. We lost Ryle, who's really looking at educational evaluation. And so he could have brought a different perspective in. But as we're kind of working in this food space, and I'm really curious to hear, just have a conversation with you all about how you're seeing these kinds of themes and topics that both Bengi and Kelly set up so beautifully for us, how those are playing out, like in where you're working and the things that you're doing. And I'll just say that from my perspective, the rural development discourse and this questions about agricultural economies are so stuck in the 1950s. Still, like in many ways, development is still talking about that modernization discourse of increasing production, getting yields up, and increasing incomes. And it's all about this kind of very narrow view of what agriculture provides, right? So, such a huge departure from the idea of culture, and everything that, food and land and relationships with human and non-human kin that form the basis of societies, that suddenly it just becomes this commodity. But, and even though there's a lot of, innovation and a lot of push by social movements to say, actually, what we're doing is way more than just producing commodities. And, agroecology has been taken up as this kind of alternative to industrial agriculture and the new green revolution of synthetic biology and so on. And even lots of philanthropic organizations at global and in the US are interested in investing, right, in agroecological transitions, but the whole discourse is still mired in a very conventional return on investment, idea of return on investment. And donors don't want to invest in small-scale farming because it's too risky. And they don't see a return, a monetary return on investment. And so I sort of came into this with a very practical desire, which is a little bit more maybe along the lines of Kelly, the kind of work that you're doing. And I, resonate with all the critical questions about, using economic evaluation. But I agree that this is the language that is being used in the mainstream. And is there any way of nudging them towards thinking differently? And to your point, Bengi, advancing distributive justice by actually finding ways to help them see that redistributing resources is going to have different kinds of returns. So I'm really curious about how these tools could be brought into those spaces. Probably there's going to be some test projects that I need to try to do first before approaching like the Agroecology Fund or the Rockefeller Agroecology Fund or something like that. Stay tuned, watch the space for Liviana 2027, where I'll be reporting back. It's very aspirational. But yeah, anyway, I'll leave it there. And I'd love to hear from all of you, what are you working on? What are you thinking about? How do these kinds of questions resonate for your work? So I'll leave it there and pass back to the floor.
Thanks, Anissa.
Yeah, I want to open it up to everyone. I think we're already a few, so I think we can self manage. Like I don't have to kind of call on people. I think we can totally do it on our own. So if anyone wants to jump in, comments, questions, random thoughts, all welcome.
Yeah, I read about the CROI quite a long time ago when Kelly, when you were working on developing that with Stephen, and then of course Catherine's paper on our urban, and it is, I think at least conceptually, a very welcome departure actually from social return on investment, because that attempt to monetize social impact was really performative and essentially just served to generate inflationary claims about impacts that weren't really credible from the not-for-profit sector, because their grants hinged on that. So it's coming from a different reasoning, which I think gives you a broader scope for what you're looking at. I mean, I couldn't imagine the social return on investment really bringing in the non-human, because the social return on investment is really designed to say, what do we save policymakers from public budgets? That's what they're really concerned with, and that's what they really measure as a proxy. So this is something much more holistic. I'm still struggling to apply community economies thinking holistically to the project we're working on, because it really is, I mean, we're really looking at the impacts on livelihoods, but we're finding that the impacts of digital finance are social and psychological as much as they're economic. But we haven't done anything looking at the environmental impact. That's just outside of the scope of our research. But we're doing research for ACAR, who are very well known to want, economistic outputs. And one of the interesting kind of vignettes that I'm trying to frame is around the subsistence economy and how digital financial services are used by, in one case, young women who've migrated into an upland village in northern Laos, because rubber plantations started up there. So on one hand, you've got a Chinese rubber concession and all the environmental damage that that's done. But on the other hand, we're speaking to farmers who are making $1,500 a month and buying new Hyundai cars, so they're not so unhappy with this. Um, and younger women from the surrounding towns who'd previously worked in factories are now marrying into these families and moving upland because it's quite an attractive proposition. But what was really interesting there is that they continue growing rice for subsistence despite having all this money. And the women, younger women who are, they take turns to work on each other's land growing the rice. In previous times, that would have been done purely reciprocally and unpaid, like maybe quite rigidly in Cambodia, like I'll work on your land tomorrow and transplant this much rice. But they continued with transplanting rice. Firstly, in Cambodia, that has stopped. No one transplants rice really that we can find now. They broadcast the seed. But in Laos, they continue to do that. And these young women have a BCL1 wallet on their phone. So they pay each other for their labor, which gives them more flexibility. They can opt out if they know that they've paid people to work on their land. But essentially, that money just stays in their wallets and circulates amongst these groups of women who still farm collectively, but bring digital financing into it as a hybrid practice. Now, what are ACAR going to be interested in there? Because it's not an economic return, it's the subsistence economy. I'm sure you'll get agricultural economists who say, oh, yes, but that has economic value because it saves their expenditure, and they'll produce all these fancy equations. But my interest in that is that this is a social impact as much as an economic one. It's about the well-being of these women, their friendships, and their capacity to maintain happiness in a new village environment that they probably weren't accustomed to before. So it's about well-being, and then we're into this discussion that we've just been talking about. How do you measure well-being, and how do you frame that kind of impact in a way that would be of interest to an institution like ACAR? So that's kind of where I'm coming at from here with my research and trying to develop a framing for impact that ACAR would take seriously and give us credit for when it comes to the outputs.
I think some of the debates around kind of the monetary valuation are kind of revealing or highlighting the economic contribution of like even the kind of non-economic impacts such as social impacts or environmental betterment is also, do we want to make them kind of, it might be strategic, but then kind of they're also, this was recently a debate that a student group at Concordia had, because Concordia Greenhouse, there was this kind of student-run collective greenhouse at the top of one of the Concordia's buildings, and it was being closed down, and the students debated whether or not they want to kind of appeal to the university administration in terms of like how much contribution, monetary or economic contribution, that the greenhouse had, if they wanted to make their case that way. But they were also afraid that if they actually make this case, then the university would be like, okay, here's a bunch of money for you, we're still gonna kind of close it down. So it's like when we start speaking that language, there's also kind of that kind of that danger, like environmental assessment, when there's an environmental disaster, and then the oil companies are like, okay, this is like what I'm going to pay for damages, we're going to pay for it, but then like it's kind of not preventive in any way. So I think there's always that long-term kind of changing the conversation in ways that we think is positive, but then kind of also like, oh, okay, if it has this value, that means that I can just like pay it off and get rid of it kind of thing. So it's a real conundrum. I don't think there's any way out of it, but yeah.
Well, I liked what you said in your talk before, Vengi, about thinking about the performativity of it, right? That's an ethical question of in each place and space. The two questions that you had about if you're going to use monetary value, thinking about does it help address injustice or not, or does it suppress or maintain plurality? We do have to think about that each time. And one of the reasons that Cultivate was interested in working with us on a community economy return on investment is that they weren't interested in a social return on investment because that required them to frame the young people as potential criminals.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, we
Mm.
saved the state this much money because these young people
Yeah.
are in jobs and training and aren't like out there like, mugging people. And they felt that if that's reflected back to the young people, you're planting that seed in their head that they're potential muggers and criminals, which is the opposite of what you're trying to do through the whole thing, which is to give them a sense of purpose and meaning that that you are doing something valuable. You're processing, waste and you're growing vegetables. And as one of our young people said, that's not such a bad life. There's worse things you could be doing than processing waste and growing vegetables, which they had meaning. But if you framed it as in, oh, we prevented you going to prison and saved the state this much, like so they were very clear they weren't going to go down the SROI route because of that that value that they held and how they'd seen it being done with other young people. I think Jay's Whitehead, who I've been working with, his approach to SROI is with Māori communities, and he's very sensitive to those kinds of things. So he personally does has his own. He's got free resources for how to do it, and he addresses Isaac that thing of the inflationary kind of one. So he does a lot of education discussion on what can you claim in terms of causality and what you can't claim. And I think his positionality as a Maori man, even though he's you know also got white privilege, but he understands that how those things can be weaponized against Indigenous people and people of color to kind of like make it sound like you're just don't it's going to be terrible and this amazing organization has saved you from your terrible life, which is performing the opposite, as I said, of what they want.
No, I'll definitely use his work in my class. I'm actually teaching like a multi-criteria tomorrow, so
Oh,
I'll
cool.
definitely take a look right now. I mean, there were others that I was using, but now this is like exciting. So yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kelly. I hadn't considered that, but completely. SROI frames people as a problem from the outset. You're either a potential criminal, you're definitely a benefit scrounger, you're definitely a burden on people. Yeah.
I was interested too, Bengi, and what you were saying a little bit about the language that you use, and that goes to what we were just saying then about framing people. But it's a real conundrum because on one hand, like I'm coming from the community composting area, and so community composters trying to talk to government for inclusion in policy or funding or anything like that are speaking a completely different language than what government is speaking, and they're two completely different animals. And it's just like they don't and I find that that's such a struggle, because on one hand you don't want to simplify or dumb down or sell out or misrepresent what the community group is doing, but at the same time they don't even have a space for this type of language to even, there's no place for that to even go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the key is, and like I know this sounds, even to me it sounds vague, like whether or not our use of this language or kind of this expression, these methods suppress or maintain kind of the plurality of other ways of thinking or talking about it and communicating its value, and like plural values that might be attached to it. But one thing that I keep thinking is because Montreal is just coming off of a 2.5 week public transit workers strike, and there's like a chronic underinvestment in public transit in Montreal, just like I think many places in the world. And of course, like one strategy of the left has always been to kind of talk about how much public transit contributes, like in terms of jobs and employment, and like how much money it saves from like investing in kind of fossil fuels, or so kind of in terms of like climate damages that are reverted. So there's kind of, and it's important because the kind of neoliberal hegemonic language about public services is that they're a drain and they're inefficient and etc., right? So it's important to kind of make this counter narrative, and it's a way to speak the same language and kind of maybe like winning the game, like winning or kind of winning in their own game in a way. But then kind of I'm always kind of a little bit kind of hesitant because like I think a public transit system should be available, and a transit system should be public regardless of its monetary cost. So like I think a publicness of certain systems, certain projects, certain initiatives like community composting, we should be also like be able to defend them without kind of reverting to that language, and like that it like this is something we need to invest in as a society regardless of how much it costs. It's kind of like I think the long-term message that we should be giving. So I think like it's possible to do it both ways. I think like it's possible to kind of say it doesn't cost as much as you think, or like it's not as an inefficient cost-wise as you think, but also even if it was, there's so many other things that is kind of, and it's difficult to do both. But I think like that's like what I think of when someone says like, does that suppress or kind of help maintain other languages around this thing? So yeah, that's kind of what I was kind of thinking the entire time we were having this conversation.
Yeah, it's sort of like a longer term process of sort of maybe hooking them with these initial things that they're interested in, and then pushing this longer term message that actually, you know, these are fundamental things that we need to be focusing on. Yeah.
Hooking is a really good term. I really like that.
Yeah, or that it's one of the criteria in your multi-criteria decision making, right? And because we do have to think about, does something cost money, and is the way that we're doing it actually affordable in a broad sense, but also some things are core values, are rights. Think, you know, if we say as a society that we value, and that we're an aging society here, that we value our elderly, then they should have access to public transport, you know, to get around, which here it's free for elderly people between, you know, outside of peak hours. So we say that we value that, and do we actually practice that, which is what we were trying to get at with the first CROI, was that the value practice kind of connection. And yeah, the monetary is just one element of that decision making. And then Clytie, I can't remember if I mentioned it yesterday on the policy one, but what Auckland City Council was doing when they built their biodigester is that they were worried they wouldn't have enough organic waste to put in it. So they were minutes from, apparently, this is on YouTube, but so hopefully this is true, but I heard they were minutes from passing a bylaw that would require everybody in Auckland to put their green waste out. Not to require it to not go to landfill, but to require them to put it there. Like the wording of it was such that you had to put the green waste out for collection for the biodigester, which would prevent both home composting and community composting.
Wow.
And somebody kind of
and
saw
also
it.
It doesn't stop people like reducing food waste, and encourages it.
Basically, yeah, because they're worried about, we need to have more food waste, and so that we can do this, which then, you know, what's the effect on the land? That you're basically, because that biodigester is in a different city, you're not you've basically moved away from a metabolic cycle of the land, especially if you're growing your own vegetables and composting your own stuff. And I'm sure people would have just kept doing that, but but you're kind of just enforcing a circle that doesn't. It's more, it's partly linear because it's broken, because the biodiversity only produces something that has to be kind of added to in order to use back on the
It's
land.
rubbish. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was like the decision making was around, the efficiency of, this is the way to do it. But they kind of, so the other thing I guess it's the same point. Well, it's suppress or maintain plurality, is that, what we were arguing is that you need to have a diversity of ways to deal with organic waste, and you need to create policy that that doesn't that enables diverse solutions to emerge, because that's where innovation actually comes from. Once you're kind of embedded in this system. That's just one example of it, but I love those questions that you use, Bengi. So did that come from the ecological economics guy? Was that what you were saying there?
Yes. I can send you I can just like paste, actually, like three of my colleagues, friends, like kind of wrote this collective piece on like whether or not, there are like four actually criteria they use, like whether or not this monetary exercise helps any kind of environmental improvement. There's the kind of this distributive justice part, there's the maintenance or suppression part, there's the commodification part. So I can just link it, like send a link.
Yeah, that would be great, because it's kind of an ethical coordinate. It's a set of ethical coordinates for when should you use measurement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's not only, it's kind of, it also like forces you not to like stay as a quote unquote expert or a researcher and engage with like the broader community with which like you're impacting through this. So
Yeah.
it is kind of, in that sense, community economies, like methodologically, I feel like.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm thinking of George DiMartino's work, on that economists should have the equivalent of a Hippocratic oath. Like those kind of questions could contribute to that sort of thing. When should economists act? Yeah,
totally.
I wanted to just jump in on the topic of like the composting and the example that you just shared about was it Auckland City Council, Kelly? It just reminded me of something that I heard in a talk by Rural Vermont, which is a small scale farmers association here, where they were actually telling a story about how the universal recycling law got put into place a few years back. I can't remember what year it wasn't too many years ago, but they did basically, that universal recycling law establishes a hierarchy for what to do with food waste that begins with you if it's not edible, like if it's edible, it should be eaten by a person, right? Donated or whatever. If it's not edible by a person, then it should be ideally given to an animal, like chickens or whatever, or composted. And if you're not able to compost it, then there's like a next layer or something like that, right? But all of this was established to actually prevent the commodification of food waste by corporate actors that were trying to come into Vermont and establish these kinds of biodigesting plants, large scale business operations that would have appropriated all of those resources. And so that universal recycling law was put in place to prevent that and has done so successfully up to now.
That's cool. And that was in Vermont.
That's in Vermont. Yeah, I can put the link in the chat. But I thought it was really fascinating. Now I don't know what that has to do with measuring things, but I was just sparked by the conversation about composting.
Well, it's about prioritizing values and thinking about what you're trying to do, I think. Yeah. And I think that's what we bring to it. And I think, even the circular economy event that we ran, we had industry people there. And when we introduced the event, which I hope to release soon because it was beautifully filmed, we talked about how, economics is a social science, and it's essentially that's what we do. It's not like a law of physics that we have to, all the businesses have to obey. You know, it's actually it's a set of decision-making tools that we can change. And I think that was interesting because a lot of them, that seems like a normal message because, yeah, like Bengi, I teach in that area. I say that all the time, but for some of them, that was like, oh, you know.
Yeah, there's this perception that it's set in stone, and it's like a natural process. This,
Yeah.
neoliberal economy kind of thing.
Yeah. And the other project that we're working on in circular economy is about subjectivity. So we're working with repair cafes and Parakori, which is a Māori zero waste network, and then the Aotearoa zero waste network. And we're doing critical inquiry groups where people examine their own subjectivities and why they choose to be repairers, or what, not even choice isn't the right word, but what kind of enabled that and pushed them into it and helps them sustain that subjectivity as a repairer or somebody who takes their stuff to be repaired or finds someone to repair it. Because I think at the heart of it, it's giving us a different economic subjectivity. A sort of, yeah, we are thinking of it as a post-capitalist economic subjectivity, but we sold it to the funders as a circular economy subjectivity. Yeah.
You know, in
prime
the
example of mobilizing language to our advantage. Sorry,
in
Isaac.
one of the workshops, the inventorying policy workshop that we did with Catherine last week, my breakout group chose to focus on the New South Wales policy for reducing waste and the funding that was being allocated to Bauer in particular and other repair cafes. But yeah, you could see how some kind of monetary evaluation of that particular policy would actually be well received, I think, by the New South Wales government. It would essentially be validating a policy that they already pursue, but perhaps encouraging them to pursue it much further and scale it up much more.
Mm.
So I have a question that's maybe out of left field slightly. How do you learn how to do a CROI? I know it's contextual, it's place-based. Where would you start? What advice would you give to aspiring?
I can give you the handbook that we developed, and I'll get your feedback on it because that's what Tomas is using yesterday. So we basically wrote up the process for the qualitative one of what we did with the value practice one, and then he's followed it. And another master's student in Canada asked me for it. So we kind of, I guess it's like 7 or 8 years old now, and I've never got around to publishing it, but it's sort of like it's in testing mode because I'm not sure about what we're doing and why we were doing it, and whether it's useful. So I'd love to have people's thoughts on that. So that's one way to do it. The other way is that I don't really know. Like, I feel like I'm just like mucking around and people keep giving me money to do it. And I don't really know what I'm doing. Sorry, this is on the internet, but yes, beginner's mind. Yeah. It's a genuine question for me. How do you do it? And that's why I keep coming back to it. Yeah. I'm keen to know if Bengi has any smart ideas about how to do it.
I think that's exactly like why it's kind of a subversive exercise, because like one of the critiques of, again, like a cost benefit analysis is that it is non-iterative, that like you do it once and then like it doesn't, like the process does not really allow like the cost and benefits to be reevaluated, or like with kind of more experience of like what you're doing, like that you might change like what you think is a cost or like what you think is a benefit. So it's kind of a static in a way kind of exercise. And but like the way that I think that the fact that you don't know of like, or kind of it doesn't, like it's not fixed in time as a method is like a good thing. And it's kind of, there's a rubric, but then it's very participative. And I was thinking about the process, like the subjectivity part. It's like yeah, I mean, just like getting around to think about what the return is or what the investment is, and like how, if you like think about the unpaid labor as an investment or return, that themselves, these questions themselves are like building economic subjects differently, thinking about like the economy as not a physical law, but like, so I think it's like the value of it is partly that it's kind of vague in a way, or like it's kind of in flux. I mean, like the other thing I was going to say is that there's an ecological economics concept called EROI, which is energy return on energy invested.
That's right.
Which is kind of like a very cool kind of indicator that shows like a different side of like the economic process, right? Like when we think about agriculture in terms of like monetary costs of inputs and then the monetary revenues of outputs, but then when you look at it in energetic terms, it gives you a very different kind of picture of actually like sometimes we're using a lot more energy to produce like energetically poor crops. So but even EROI is, as a concept, it kind of builds, it counts all the inputs in energetic terms, all the outputs in energetic terms. So it's reducing to a single indicator still. So it has its limits because of that. So I was like thinking, EROI is even kind of, it doesn't like it when you do it quantitatively, of course, but I think the qualitative part is like, it's like in flux, and like it's a very good community building tool too. So
I just want to pick up on, oh, sorry, Kelly.
No, you go. I was just going to say that energy, that I've looked at that one as well, and at our symposium when we speak to that was really interesting, but also super depressing.
Yes, that's true. I don't want to get into the implications of it at all.
With the energy thing, I mean, I've seen on agriculture, like the caloric input and output, like of industrial agriculture, it's like 10 to 1, 10 in, 1 out, and the opposite for like small scale farming. But what I was actually going to say, or try to pick up on, is the point that you just said, Bengi, about like the changing over time and the sort of static nature of cost benefit analysis, and it just made me also think of a really important aspect of the way that return on investment is thought about, which is the time that's expected, right? The timeline of return is so fast that in order for all these other benefits, like ecologies move slow, social benefits move slowly, like change is much slower, right? And to expect that we're going to have impacts and results and returns within a 6-month project or even a 2-year thing is unrealistic. But that remains a really important challenge, I think, for working with the redistribution of resources if we're trying to make a case to donors or any kind of funders for this kind of work, that the timeline needs to be different. And I'm wondering if any of you have had any experience with that.
Well, I think one thing I would say in New Zealand is that iwi or tribal groups make their plans at 200 or 500 year plans. So yeah, Ngai Tahu's one's 500 year. I think Te Arawa's one's 200 years. So in one iwi that I did some consulting work for, they said we see ourselves as the real planners for this region because we are thinking we're thinking far outside the political cycle, far outside our own jobs, but we're thinking about our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren, which you already know that kind of way of thinking. But here, that is, they look like 5-year plan documents, and some councils, well, I think there's legal requirements that councils are supposed to take them into account. But how that's defined is that people are like, yeah, we read it once. But some of the organisations, and one of my master's students is working on this, have created these mana whakahonua rohi agreements between hapu or specific clans and specific councils where they've signed an agreement to work together, and for Māori group, for this particular Māori group to be consulted by this particular council on these kinds of particularly resource consent issues. And I think that's quite promising too, because on the one hand, you've got the democratic process with the council, but then you've got this intergenerational entity. And then you've got an agreement to work together. So you've actually kind of got the best of both, I hope. We could also have the worst of both, approaches. And, one of the concerns people have, in the backlash against, Māori rights is that it's not democratic because it's a cultural system based on kinship and some hierarchies. But, when you've got these agreements, you're actually kind of balancing that. It's not quite what your question is, but yeah, I feel like that's where I have a bit of hope here.
No, but like that's a very pertinent question. I mean, especially like the use of these methods to make like environment, like particularly decisions that has kind of long lasting and like more often than not, very uncertain, very kind of unknown impacts into the future of ecosystems. Kind of doing a cost benefit analysis that's super static is very dangerous and I mean, and often I think like this might be a method, one of the methods or one of the kind of aspects of the decision, and like it might make sense. But oftentimes even like the assumptions that are made in terms of like the time frame in which these costs and benefits are being evaluated are not even transparent. So I think perhaps one thing to start with, even if we don't want to or we cannot completely replace these methods of decision making, is to force democratization of and transparency and accountability around the kind of the knowledge that is produced that goes into them.
And this, the point you were just making, it made me think, I guess, the section of the Take Back the Economy book where where Catherine and Stephen and Jenny have the intergenerational yardstick, and that sounds quite similar, Kelly, to the principles you were talking about, which is, I mean, very interesting to hear how that's actually embedded in policy, at least nominally, that it has to be listened to. But it sounds conceptually similar to me, at least. The idea that should go at least 9 generations forward in trying to think about impact and ultimately maintaining or keeping the commons open, and what will the commons look like 9 generations from now.
Yeah, and some of those, like the decisions that Ngāi Tahu makes, which is the big South Island tribe, it's a 500-year plan, but like they kind of have stages, and one of those stages is kind of like nailing capitalism, making loads of money, investing in property. Like it's not like it's a non-capitalist. Well, there's elements of it, and that it's intergenerational, and that it's based on kinship. But yeah, as some of you would have read Matt Scobie's book on the economic possibilities of decolonization. We had a session last year's Liviana. He's Ngāi Tahu, and he's written a book about that using diverse economies. But he's some of the strategies, like it's not like indigenous equals post-capitalist, yeah, or progressive, or whatever you want to say. But I think what I think is useful is that, yeah, you're thinking, okay, it might be you're taking a risk on extracting resources and doing things this way, but you're still having to think about 500 years, where are you going to end up? Whereas I think a lot of the time, the kind of investments that are being made in other circles are not thinking that far in the future. Yeah.
Got another question about impact, and I think you wrote, there's a recent paper, Kelly, right, that you've got where you talk about starting with impact and then doing it and flipping it. And it was
Yeah.
making me, yeah, and recently I attended this incredible bioregioning conference, in which I learned about a network, a social media platform called Bloom. Have any of you ever heard of it? I'll put the link in the chat. I don't fully understand how it works, but what I gleaned from the presentation was that it's a platform where community groups, any organizations can upload work that they're already doing, and then they get paid through a peer-to-peer, some kind of blockchain
Oh,
mechanism. And so it completely flips the whole idea of applying for money for a project and then doing the project and then reporting on the impact. It's like, no, this is stuff that we're already doing. It's making an impact. And now you can see it, pay us.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was curious to hear, like, that's also a subversive way of even like not following the script, right? The linear script
Mm.
of project evaluation and reporting. Do you want to talk a bit about what you did in that research where you started with impact, or that paper that you wrote?
Yeah, I mean, I thought this did finish at 3:30, so I do have to go in a minute. But I've just emailed my colleague that I'm meeting with. But I think what I was trying to do in that paper was say that was more about delivering to the community first. So it was the life and vacant spaces work. And I was talking about the exhibition that I just told you guys about earlier. And what we did is we began with the exhibition. So we began by collecting the data for the exhibition and collecting the photos and creating an exhibition down the centre street of Christchurch, because then the time frame suited the community better, right? Because then the time frame from data collection to impact was only like 3 months, or it was probably a bit longer. That was probably because we had COVID, but it was probably like 7 or 8 months, rather than the normal way where you do the research and then it gets peer reviewed and you publish it and then somebody reads it and then you might do some like of those kind of dissemination things at the end. And then only now, like, I'm writing up the academic articles and the project's well finished. Yeah, so it was kind of, for me, that was about prioritizing delivering to the community first rather than them waiting years for something. But I like what they're saying. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how many people give them money, but
Yeah, I have to find out a bit more about how it works. There was someone presenting on it who said, "Yeah, just get in touch if you want to understand it." And there is a page buried on their website that
yeah,
explains how it works.
okay.
But I love
Yeah,
this
and now
idea
I'm
of,
in a planning program, so I feel like I've just become a lot more aware of how councils are legally obligated to make decisions around money. Yeah, and the constraints, but also the I guess the democratic necessity of that as well. Yeah, yeah, I'll send that to you, Clytie. Yeah, but I do have to go in a couple of minutes, sorry.
Kelly, can
Thanks,
you
Jill.
send that to me as well?
I'm
I
just going to
mean,
put it in the chat
yeah.
before we close,
Oh,
so,
great.
or maybe I'll have to find the link.
Mm.
I've just got it on my door and I can't remember what it's called, so I'm just going to look.
Yeah. Anissa, I did an action research project back in 2018 that I've still never written anything from, but it was to help yoga and meditation retreat up in Cambodia, in a community where they didn't have refuse collection, to get plastic out of their supply chain. And I kind of did a rudimentary plastic audit, and we reckon at least 4,500 plastic bags that would have otherwise been burnt in the field behind the retreat weren't in circulation. But yeah, Kelly's paper could help you think about that kind of approach, putting the impact up front and
Yeah,
thinking
yeah,
about how you measure it later.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Oh,
Yeah, I
thank,
mean, look, because I
Mm,
just feel like so much of the work we're doing, I mean, we're all doing work that is not paid, right? That we do because it matters to us and
mm,
because we're in community with other people and that work
mm,
matters to them as well. And yeah, where's the time to go and apply for money? I don't know.
mm.
But if there's a way of flipping the whole thing,
Yeah.
to say, hey, look what we're already doing. Just do you want to support it?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
It would be
Well,
great.
thanks everyone for all the links too. I've got 4 tabs open to read before I go home because I close my computer down every night.
I
Likewise.
know Kelly has to go, so I wouldn't mind
Yeah.
going even if it's 9:35 p.m. and I'm teaching tomorrow morning, but stay on the you can stay on the panel and chat more. I think I wouldn't, I mean, I don't think anyone would mind. You'd just be, I think you'd
Yeah.
just be
Mm.
kept recorded. That would be the only problem. But or we can just close it here, and I know everyone knows how to contact each other, so
Yeah.
I don't think anything will be lost.
Mm.
Thank you a lot. I think this was, I mean, small, but like a small group, a lot of good discussion. I'm glad I mean, at some point today, I mean, Kelly knows this, but I was like, should we cancel? It's only like 2 people out of like 8 that we thought would show up. I'm glad we didn't. So,
Me
yeah.
too. Thank you for looking
Small but
after us.
mighty.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
it's-
See you,
it's-
everybody.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
everybody.
Okay,
It was
thanks
very,
a lot.
very interesting.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks a lot for
Bye.
organizing and
Yeah.
for sharing your work. Yeah.
Thank you for coming and contributing. Yes. Bye.
Yes, pleasure.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Take care.
Well, it's nice to
Bye.
see you again, Anissa, and nice to
You
meet you,
too.
Bengi. And
Nice to
You
meet you
too.
too.
Hopefully see you in
Okay.
Australia in less than in a few weeks. Less than a
Oh,
month.
really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, when are you coming?
Well, for the symposium.
Oh, right, yeah, I can't go. I was supposed to be going,
Oh,
but
Isaac.
can't. Well, Star and I are preparing to
Bye,
go to
Clyde.
Cambodia.
Bye.
Bye, Clyde. Yeah, me and Star are preparing to go to Cambodia, number one.
Oh.
And number two, she's more than 3 months pregnant again.
Oh my God.
And by that time will be 5 months, and I can't leave her alone with Elizabeth at 5 months pregnant for a week. I just can't do it.
No,
I
that
mean,
is
I don't
so
even
fair.
want, yeah, I don't even want to leave her on her own for one night, never mind 5. So,
Mm.
yeah. So unfortunately, that's a shame. But will you be passing through Sydney, or will you be going straight out to the retreat?
Well, when I arrive, I'm kind of arriving just before we all head down on that
Yeah.
bus. But
Uh,
afterwards, I am planning on I'm sticking around until early Jan
all
because
right. Well,
yeah, so we'll find a way to connect. Maybe we
well,
can
I
split
so
in
want you to meet
Sydney.
Lizzie. I
Yeah, I
so
would
want you to
love
meet her.
that.
It's
I
just
would
she,
love that. Yeah. I mean,
she's insane.
I am sure. And how old is she now?
15 months.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Because I don't know if you ever met my friend, she's not part of CERN,
Hmm.
Dinny from Sri Lanka. I don't know if you ever crossed paths with her, but she and her partner Ryan, who were living in Sydney but now are in
All right.
Melbourne, had a
Yeah.
baby, little boy Nath, who's just like 3 months younger, yeah, younger than Lizzie. So I want to go down and visit them in Melbourne. Yeah, I'd love to come and see you. Of course, there's
Yeah.
Gina's little one as well that I
Oh, of
met.
course, yeah, yeah. Me and Gina have, I mean, Gina's met Lizzie and I've met
Yeah.
her kid, but it's separately. But yeah, we always said we were going to meet up together in Sydney,
Mm.
and haven't done that yet. So maybe we could all meet up, and me and Gina will have kids in tow.
Yeah, there should definitely be some play dates going on in there for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, good
Oh,
to
that,
see you, Isaac.
yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah, good to see you too, Anissa, and it's good to know your work's going so well in Vermont.
it's going,
Sounds
yeah.
amazing, yeah. And
It's
you're doing a lot
good.
of work with Ethan, I gather, so that must be really generative. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Just we've been able to collaborate on a few things since I've moved here, so that's been wonderful.
Sounds a lot more rewarding than my project, frankly. I mean, my
Gosh,
project is very limited in scope, and agroecology would be a bit more interesting, but my
yeah.
project is what it is, so I'm trying to find these things that are interesting. And as I said, like, women maintaining reciprocal labour practices and things. I'm trying to at least glean some things out of there that I can write passionately about.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to find the sparks, right? That are
Yeah,
meaningful to you. Otherwise, it's impossible
you just get stuck. Yeah.
to get the motivation to write
Yeah.
anything down. So.
Well, all our work so far has been very dark. We did a presentation at ICS where we brought because we had a workshop with all the Laos and Cambodia counterparts here in Sydney. So we had an ICS seminar with 7 of us presenting. That was 2 colleagues from Cambodia, 1 from Laos, and then we on the panel afterwards, 3 people from Laos, 3 from Cambodia, myself and Erin, all on the panel. So it was great, but really what we're just presenting is very dark, that in Cambodia farmers aren't using these digital tools like wallets much, even though they've got a much more advanced financial services ecosystem and financial services industry than Laos. And indeed, the reviewers had asked us why we were going to Laos at all. They said we should just focus on Cambodia. But it's turned out that farmers in Laos are using this stuff left, right, and centre. And in Cambodia, they're not. And the reasons are very simple, that in Cambodia, they've got no money. And if you've got no money, they've got no money to put in a bank, then why they're not using mobile banking. But
Don't need a three-year research project to tell you that.
No, exactly, not really. I mean, we didn't, we could have guessed that that would be an issue, but it was just so profoundly an issue for small farmers in peri-urban areas. They've lost their land, they've sold their land, they have to rent land to farm on, and the expenses of farming are such that on such little land that and the debts they have to microfinance are such that they literally have nothing left over, and their capacity to survive depends more and more on the off-farm incomes, so they want to spend as little time farming as possible. So the interesting thing from a community economies perspective is that in Laos, the farmers have got food security. They don't rent land, they own it. They have much bigger parcels of land to farm on. The other kind of economic development hasn't proliferated as much, so it does at least mean that farm labour is cheaper, so they can hire labour. And when you ask them, do you have any self-provisioning? In the end, we just started asking them, do you have ducks, fish and chickens and grow your own vegetables? And it was like, yes, 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 yes. And they have a bit of spare money left because they self-provision, and they have spare money, and they're putting it in mobile wallets. And now they're using that to buy inputs, receive payments from traders. So that's the overarching thing. So we can approach that from a community economies perspective and say, look, it can be otherwise. This is a resilient context in Laos, and this is the neoliberal context in Cambodia. But Stephen says he thinks I'm essentializing Cambodia too much, and I need to think in a more kind of less essentialist way.
Well, I don't know. Stephen may very well be right, but I mean, the way that you painted the picture, I mean, what's striking to me is the starting context of whether they own land or not, and
Whether
everything.
they own land,
Yeah.
and exactly.
And
Whether they own enough land to farm on, and whether they're self-provisioning actually is such a significant part of their livelihood.
yeah. Yeah,
So
very interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure you'll glean some good insights, and maybe are you doing some kind of comparative element then as
Well,
part of
we're
the
trying to
briefing?
avoid it because Laos and Cambodia don't like to be compared, especially we found out Lao policymakers hate to be compared to Cambodia because they're usually shown in the light of being backward. Except in our research, the policymakers in Laos might be shown in a very good light. That
Well,
they have.
you could make that case, in fact, and I mean, look, just from a totally different context, but my good friend who works for the FAO as a consultant, or was for years, on land tenure reform processes, brought you know, a very participatory and inclusive method to the land reform conversation in Niger. First in Burkina Faso, then Niger, and it took almost a decade to get everyone on board with this, including, you know, bringing tribal chiefs into the conversation, traditional leaders and women into the conversation about land tenure. Women were not part of the conversation before. Took a
Right.
long time to get it going, but then when they did it, it was all about sort of highlighting to the government people how innovative they were for doing this. And they loved it, right? It was like really about how great this was and how unusual and innovative. And now all these neighboring countries, like Chad, wants to do it. They've got
Right. Oh,
so
wow. That's
excited about
really
it.
profound.
It really is.
That's
So
great.
I wouldn't overlook the potential, right, of boosting the kind of egos of the Lao policymakers. You know,
Yeah.
if you
I
could
mean,
show
yeah.
sort of how how this is impacting people's lives, you know, positively.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel we've been chaperoned into very carefully constructed, curated places. To be
Mm.
honest, one of our research assistants in Laos is basically she's a government hire and she's very senior in the government, and so we kind of been chaperoned to good news stories. That we're very well aware of that, but it doesn't mean that we can't say that these aren't good news stories. And I mean, in some ways, I wonder, is this accidental? Is it just that there's hasn't been economic development yet, and once there is, things will change? Or is it because the government are enlightened? And examples of that are that the apart from where the rubber plantations taken off, the natural resources there have gone to, that's bad. But been to two other places, which has got very well maintained community fishery that provides livelihood, not just subsistence, but you've got shrimpers earning $10 a day by going there, and it's very sustainable, big community fishery that's off, it's a lake that comes off the Mekong River. And then in another instance, the the community forestry was very
Mm.
well conserved. So they haven't just got subsistence, they've also got access to community forestry resources, community fisheries, and so on. So their subsistence is actually very strong for, for policy reasons. It's not just accidental.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
There's some
yeah.
like really great things happening there,
Yeah.
Isaac.
But
Yeah.
it's interesting just to think how that all ties together with the enabling environment for a digital financial service ecosystem. It just, quite simply means that at the end of the day, people have some surplus.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, good to chat with you. It's nice
Yeah,
to have.
it's great to chat. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I will once I get my feet under me and go through the symposium, once I know the dates I'm back in Sydney, I'll get in
yeah,
touch and be great to
be
meet up.
wonderful. And yeah, meet up with Bavia while you're, yeah. Well, no, Bavia's
Exactly.
coming to the symposium, right? Of course. So, yeah.
She is, yeah, and I think
Yeah.
she's got plans to see family in India afterwards. So I think at the time we'll be able to catch up. We'll be at the symposium. But big congratulations on number two. And
Yeah.
also good luck.
Thank you. I was going to say good luck. Yeah, good luck with
Yeah.
that. But yeah,
And all the
yeah,
best to Star and give Lizzie a
yeah.
big kiss. Send me a photograph. I haven't seen anything
Oh,
recent. So, or a video or
she's
something.
insane. You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. Catherine can't get over how much Lizzie looks like me.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
I really
anyway,
need a video. I really need a video. Please send me one.
will do.
All right, mate. You take
Okay.
care. Have a
Bye
great
for
rest of
now.
the day. Take care.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.